千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. As you can see, a very long chapter, easily 2 to 3 times longer than some of the shorter ones that we have seen. So, as always, let me just read off of this as the way for us to begin our analysis. Cease learning, no more worries. Respectful response and scornful response. How much is the difference? Goodness and evil, how much do they differ? What do people fear? I cannot be unafraid. So desolate, how limitless it is. The people are excited, as if enjoying a great feast, as if climbing up to the terrace in spring. I alone am quiet and uninvolved, like an infant not yet smiling. So weary, like having no place to return. The people all have surplus, while I alone seem lacking. I have the heart of a fool indeed, so ignorant. Ordinary people are bright. I alone am muddled. Ordinary people are scrutinizing. I alone am obtuse. Such tranquility like the ocean, such high wind as if without limits. The people all have goals, and I alone am stubborn and lowly. I alone am different from them and value the nourishing mother. So quite a long chapter, as I said, and the majority of it is about Lao Tzu speaking of himself and comparing his thoughts, his beliefs, his tendencies, his inclinations with those of the ordinary people, and noting the differences, that he thinks about things in very different ways. Now, there are parts of this that are going to be difficult to understand. The parts that compare where he compares himself to most people, I think those are relatively easy to understand. But then there's some stuff around it that would really require some guidance, some experience guidance, and then they will turn into, as I usually promise, crystal clarity. So let's begin by looking at the first part. The first few lines, right off the bat, we have a reiteration. In the first line, we talk about cease learning, and we note that this is very similar to the beginning of chapter 19 as well. So this is actually an overall theme that is reiterated throughout the Tao Te Ching itself, that Lao Tzu says, okay, well, knowledge is very good, intelligence is all very good, but watch out. You can definitely fall into the trap of knowledge. And many people today do fall into that trap, ironically, including the people who study the Tao Te Ching. When they fall into the knowledge trap in studying the Tao Te Ching, their focus becomes not the meaning of the words, but the trivial details of this word compared to that word, this addition compared to that addition. All the comparisons, all the analysis may not contribute anything to their lives. That is, it may not change their lives, as I am hoping that our discussion of the Tao Te Ching will change yours and mine. For that reason, when we explore this particular chapter, I'm going to go lighter on the individual characters, their pronunciation and meaning, and I'm going to go much heavier on meaning. When you really understand what this particular chapter is talking about, this is one of the chapters that can really change the way you look at the world and change your life. The way to change your life is to begin by changing your thoughts. Changing your thoughts has all kinds of repercussions in changing the way you perceive other people, interact with them, the way you make decisions, determine the direction of your life. So it can have a dramatic impact. So it's all a question about how do we change our thoughts appropriately for maximum beneficial effect to us and the people we care about. So, looking at the beginning of this particular chapter, here I'm just pointing out that already among the first 4 lines, we have repeating characters. So it may not be obvious at first glance, but I think once those characters are highlighted in red, as you see here in this slide, it becomes more obvious. And you can note similarities in the translation of line 2 and line 4. That line 2 and line 4 are both comparing different things, sort of like 2 ends of a spectrum. So in line 2, it's respect and scorn being compared and contrasted. In line 4, it's good and bad, goodness and evil. So we have repeating characters there, and there's more. So looking further down into line 3 and 5, you definitely see the repeating characters in 3 and 5. So from 2 to 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have sort of an A-B structure, from a poetic perspective, a poetic structural perspective. So then the first line, line 1, kind of stands on its own. And if you look at the meaning, it starts talking about learning leading to worries, and then the 4 lines, A-B, and then it goes to a sectional conclusion where it talks about what the people fear. I cannot be unafraid. This is one of the lines where you're probably going to need a little bit of guidance to have the whole thing make sense. And then desolate, limitless, line 7. So these 2 lines, 6 and 7, are conclusions, which means that from 1 to 7, it forms a mini section. Now, there's a way to divide up the section below as well. You can see that it's a pretty big section there. Although there are no obvious ways of doing it, there's a dividing line between 16 and 17. I won't show that for now. Instead, I want to point out the unifying factors that we can pinpoint from 8 all the way down to the very end, to line 26. So let me explain what I mean by that. Okay, so first thing that I'm doing is that I am picking and choosing 2 characters that are common characters, and you will see reiteration from line 11 down, matching 2 characters in 15, matching 2 characters in 18, and then 20, 24, and 25. So first character, 我. Second character, 读. So I know that you perhaps are not familiar with Chinese characters, with Mandarin characters. However, I would like to ask you to stretch a little bit. Look at lines 11, 15, 18, 20, 24, and 25. Look at the translation and see if we can pick out commonalities. You know, I think if you look at all of them, you will see two words that are reiterated in all of those lines. Can anyone figure out what those words are? Those words corresponding to 我独. Excellent. Excellent. You guys are correct. Those words matching those characters are I alone. In fact, 我, the first character here, is probably one of the most commonly used characters in Mandarin. Whatever you say, me, myself, and I, you know, in English, it's represented by different words, but in Mandarin, it's all the same character, 我. And then the second character, 独, that means singular, alone, by yourself. So here, these are all references to Lao Tzu. These are words of Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu expressing how he is compared to how people are. So with every single line, he's basically saying, everybody else is a certain way. I alone am different. I'm not like them. I think in a different way. So this is the reason why I say that when you cultivate and study the Tao, you oftentimes end up with unconventional thinking, or you can see the conventional thinking and you can transcend the conventional thinking, conventional notions. So where does Lao Tzu, what are the characters that refer to other people? Let me point those out to you, and I'll, instead of red, I will do it in blue. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 iterations where Lao Tzu is referring to other people. They have one common character, the second one, 人, which means person or people, individual or individuals, plural. In Mandarin, singular individual are the exact same character. And then what about the character in front of it? Well, we have two different characters. In line 8, 14, and 23, you have 众, which means all. So 众人would be all people, which is just the people. So what about this other one? This is Su. This character means mundane. So meaning average, typical, most people, ordinary people. So you can see that it's translated to just that, ordinary people. So let me point those out. I think you can see the correspondence there. The people and ordinary people. So you can also see by comparing the blue to the red that reference to the people is followed by I alone. And again here, the people, I alone. Then ordinary people, I alone. Again, ordinary people, again, I alone. And then finally, the people, I alone, etc. So this makes it clear that we're talking about a series of comparisons between other people and the mind of a Tao cultivator, in this case, Lao Tzu. So When we're at the very end of this, when we have analyzed and understood exactly how Lao Tzu thinks and how he sees the world, I'm going to be challenging you. You can probably anticipate the question that I will ask. The question is going to be, so now that you know the way that Lao Tzu thinks, you have sort of insights into his mind. The question then becomes, how do you think? How do you see the world? Compare how you think with how Lao Tzu thinks. What are the similarities? What are the differences? If there are differences, do you think that is something that you would want to change about yourself in cultivating more of a Tao mindset? Maybe so, maybe not. I'm curious. I'm curious about how you would think about this, about the different ways that you approach the world compared to a sage. Okay, so that's actually enough of an overview for now. What I want to do is that I want to begin tackling the lines one by one. There's actually quite a bit to talk about. I'm actually going to start with the story pretty much right off the bat. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, here we are in line 1. 绝学无忧, cease learning, no more worries. So the first thing to point out is that the first two characters, 绝学, is similar to 决胜 in the previous chapter. So the difference is that in the previous chapter, it's talking about, hey, stop this false pretense of sagehood. Sen is a reference to 圣人, someone whose wisdom approaches the divine. So, hey, stop pretending that you have that kind of wisdom. Here, it's about, hey, stop this idea that books are everything, that knowledge is everything. Just stop it. And instead, live your life more fully by occasionally being away from books. So, in other words, don't be a bookworm. Live a life. Go out there, interact with people, etc. Learn the Tao from daily life. So let me sum that up for you. Here, the idea is to stop focusing too much on dead knowledge, meaning static knowledge from books that have not been applied and tested in real life. So how do we know that this is what Lao Tzu is talking about? Well, we know because this is a common thread among all the sages. As an example, Zhuangzi tells a story about the wheelmaker. It's a wheelmaker who works for the king, who had a discussion about his craft of making wheels. And inadvertently, the wheelmaker criticized the king when the king was reading a book that was passed down through the generations. The wheelmaker said, well, that's dead knowledge. And he's not wrong about that. When words are written down, they become sets, not in stone, but on paper. So in later days, when newer knowledge, improved knowledge, clearer knowledge emerges, that old knowledge, the static knowledge, becomes outdated bit by bit. But because books are not living things that can grow and evolve and change with time, the words that they contain must be taken with a grain of salt. So I feel the effect of this more keenly when I realized that I used to collect all these computer magazines to learn about the latest development. And coming to realize much later on that, well, in the world of computers, knowledge, technology, the latest products, hardware and software, they become obsolete so quickly. Just a couple of years out, those computer magazines become practically useless. Talking about old stuff when newer stuff is now available. So I became very aware of books, and in this case, magazines, as dead knowledge. Not really evolving or changing as the world changes. So bottom line is this: life is meant to be experienced and savored rather than studied, dissected, and worried over, which is why Lao Tzu says, cease learning, no more worries. So the more you treat life as a sterile subject to be studied, the more worries you feel. On the other hand, the more you treat life as an adventure to be experienced, the more fun you're going to have. You're going to have too much fun to experience any worries or anxieties. So that's the whole idea there. So I regard this as a very important point. And the reason is because, as you can see, it appears as first line here, and it's also at the beginning of chapter 19. Because of the overall brevity and conciseness of the Tao Te Ching, whenever Lao Tzu takes the time to repeat anything, I sit up and pay attention. My ears perk up. You know what? Oh, here's an idea that's being reiterated. It must mean that it's important to Lao Tzu. Because for other topics, other subjects, he's very sparing in his words and descriptions. Perhaps referencing an idea with just one line. So if there's more than one line, if it's reiterated many times, and this idea certainly is, this idea that, hey, don't rely too much on knowledge, it's definitely repeated. So, I want to pay attention. I want to know why. I want to know why he feels he needs to repeat that, and I want to know why he feels that book knowledge is limited. So let me take everyone through some of the overall ideas about knowledge. If you rely too much on book knowledge, certain things will happen. So I do understand that when we talk about this, there's a certain irony involved because we're all gathering together to discuss knowledge about the Tao Te Ching. So this is by way of saying that knowledge is not good or bad. I'm not saying that knowledge is bad, and I'm not saying that knowledge is good. We usually have this idea that knowledge is power. Well, in the Tao, knowledge is a tool, and it can be used for good or bad. If you rely on it too much, you can get negative effects. For instance, you can become increasingly disconnected from reality. And that can happen because when you're absorbed in a book, whether fiction or nonfiction, you become part of the world, quote unquote, that the book is building. So in a fictional work, like a novel, you begin to experience this other realm that's created by the author. And it's wonderful. It's meant for entertainment. When you're reading nonfiction, maybe how-to books on certain subjects, well, it's painting a picture for you. It's depicting a certain reality. Now, it's the reality of the situation as the author sees it at the time of writing. So how does it apply to the world today at the time of reading? It may not. It may be very good. Or it may be something that's sorely in need of an update. But if you don't think about that. You can fall into the trap of assuming that it's reality today and therefore becoming disconnected from the actual reality. So there's another positive or negative effect I want to bring up with you. You may start believing that knowledge makes you superior to others. Frankly, I see this all the time. I see people who especially have gained knowledge of terms, names, definitions, and then they start wielding that like a cudgel to browbeat other people, and they will constantly be asking people, well, how do you define this? What's your definition of that? Well, definitions are just like the dead knowledge in books. They're static. They can be useful up to a point. And then after that, you have to match them up against reality. So, as I mentioned, there are many stories in the Tao tradition that speak on this particular topic, and it's important for us to know them really well. The Wheelmaker is one of them, but because recently I've told quite a few Zhuangzi stories, I want to use a story that is not from the Zhuangzi material, not from the Zhuangzi books that I have written. Rather, I want to tell you a Tao story about ancient books. So I am going to park my slide on that, the ancient books. We're now reaching a halfway point in our meeting. So while we're on this particular image, I'm going to call for a 5-minute break. When we come back, it ought to be 11:30, 11:31, something like that. And then I would like to share the story of the ancient books with you. Let's go ahead and take 5. So as you're looking at this image of the ancient books, I'd like to tell you a story with that title, The Ancient Books. Once upon a time, there lived a scholar who loved ancient books. He spent his time collecting and studying ancient books. Why? Well, because he believed they contained powerful secrets. He would oftentimes tell other people, he would say, listen, the masters of antiquity, they really knew what they were doing. He said, most people today do not understand their wisdom. If not for a few mavericks like me who still study them, their secret knowledge, the power they taught, would be lost forever. Now, by chance, this scholar came across 2 books that dated back 1,000 years. One was about military strategies, and the other was about agricultural irrigation. He snapped them up and enshrined them as his most prized possession in his entire collection of ancient books. He then devoted the next couple of years to studying these 2 books, and he did this behind closed doors because he was guarding them jealously. He didn't want anyone else to be privy to the powerful ancient secrets. When he was done, he declared to everyone that he was ready to apply the ancient powerful secrets from these ancient books. So he called a meeting for the men of the village. So they all gathered together, wondering what he was up to. he stood up to talk to all of them. He said, "My friends, as all of you know, we have groups of bandits roaming in this area. And they definitely have disrupted the trade that we have. So we must not tolerate them any longer. I intend to organize an invincible army and lead it into battle against them, against those bandits. And I want all of you to join me in fighting them, fighting the bandits." So some of the villagers were definitely skeptical, and one of them asked, "Well, you say you want to lead an army, but you're a scholar. I mean, how much military experience have you had?" The scholar said, "Well, no actual experience, but that does not matter. Do you want to know why? I'll tell you why." He held up one of his ancient books for all of them to see. He said, "Look at this. I have diligently studied the secrets in this ancient book, and now I have the ability to command an army of 1,000,000 soldiers. That being the case, to create a fighting force of 100 men is, child's play. It's nothing. It's nothing in comparison to commanding an army of 1,000,000 soldiers." Now, the scholar seemed extremely confident. So the villagers decided, "Oh, well, he's so sure about that. Maybe we should give it a try." So they signed up for his army. And he taught them the military drills from his manual, one of the ancient books, and ordered them to keep practicing. Next, the scholar went to see the regional governor. And when he was finally admitted to see the governor, he said, "Sir, as you know, this province has had severe flooding almost every year. This has led to, as you know, a lot of suffering and loss of lives. Now, I bring you good news, sir, because I can lead an effort to end this problem once and for all. I would like to request that you assign to me personally, under my command, a team of workers so we can begin addressing this problem immediately." Now, just like the villagers, the governor was pretty skeptical also. He asked, "Well, you're a scholar. You're proposing a massive project, a massive undertaking, massive construction. How much experience have you had with engineering on such a scale?" The scholar said, "Experience, Your Excellency, I'll show you experience." So he brought out his other ancient book on agricultural irrigation. He showed it to the governor and he said, "Sir, I hold in my hand the accumulated experience of our ancestors over 1,000 years in solving this problem, this exact problem. The secrets that I have gleaned from this ancient book gives me the ability to turn deserts into farmlands. That being the case, taming one flooding river is child's play." So again, he seemed so supremely confident. And the governor decided, maybe there's something here. Got nothing to lose. Let's give him a chance. So the governor assigned a bunch of workers under the command of the scholar. With that, the scholar proceeded to design channels irrigation channels in accordance to the principles that he had learned from ancient books. And then he directed his team to dig, implement the design, implement his design. So they were fortunately able to complete this project right before the flooding season. Heavy rains bring heavy floods. So satisfied, the scholar returned to the village. And when he got there, the men said they were done with the drills, and he was pleased. He said, "Excellent. I am moving from one triumph to another by using the secrets of antiquity. Let us now march against the bandits. We will bring them to justice. They can run, but they can't hide." So they had no trouble finding the bandits, who were not hiding at all. They didn't feel that they needed to hide from the farmers. So the scholar consulted his manual, the military training, and ordered a frontal assault. His invincible army joined in epic battle with the enemy, the bandits, and his invincible army immediately collapsed. Their drills forgotten, the villagers ran for their lives. They scattered in every direction. They were all fleeing. The scholar found himself running away as well, with several bandits in hot pursuit, intending upon killing him. The bandits were almost on top of him, almost caught up with him, when they suddenly stopped, reversed direction, and fled. So the scholar was relieved until he saw what it was that caused them to flee. They fled because there was a wall of water that swept up from the river and rushing toward him. So apparently his irrigating channels, his secret techniques were pretty much as effective as his military strategies. He had one last moment to think one last thought before the water drowned him. He thought, "The masters of antiquity, they lied to me." The end. So I think, the story may seem a little bit odd, like this chapter we're currently studying, because our study of the Tao is all about learning knowledge from ancient books. And the teachings of the Tao, yeah, we can think of them as powerful secrets in improving, transforming one's life. So doesn't this story undermine the whole concept? It's suggesting that learning from ancient books deliver poor results. Well, in reality, the idea from this story is essential to the authentic tradition of the Tao. Just as you saw in chapter 20 and 19, Lao Tzu is basically emphasizing that words cannot express the eternal Tao. And that's a concept that goes way back to chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching. Therefore, teachers who really know the Tao will never let us forget the difference between book knowledge and reality. So this story is actually not contradictory to what we're doing. It's actually one of the things that makes the Tao special. The practical aspects, the actual application into daily life. It's only difficult to understand for those of us who are so used to the idea that knowledge is power. If knowledge is power, why should we abandon it? And how can abandoning knowledge benefit us? So the story helps explain, because the scholar in the story failed in spectacular fashion when he placed too much faith in his books. He was certainly disconnected from reality, and he certainly felt that the quote-unquote secret knowledge that he learned from his books, untested in reality, made him superior, made him a superior architect of irrigation channels, made him a superior commander of military forces. That blind faith is what resulted in disasters. And it's disaster not just for him, but also for the villagers. So knowledge isn't necessarily bad, but it's definitely limited. Inability to see this limitation is what leads to problems. So can we see signs of trouble when we are too focused on knowledge? And definitely yes. I would suggest to you that when the scholar was fixated on powerful secrets, well, that by itself is a bad sign. It reveals a belief that there are certain shortcuts in life, certain secrets, lost knowledge. If you think about it, this whole idea that there are powerful secrets that you can learn, it's very similar to the concept of magic spells. You know, it's something that promises miraculous results without requiring a whole lot of effort on your part. That would not be in accordance with the Tao. And the reason why we say that is because the true Tao is in plain sight, not hidden and esoteric shortcuts that you have to discover. And it's not in ancient books or anywhere else. So the real secret of the Tao is no secret at all. Now, the other sign is the arrogance of the scholar. Like I said, too much reliance on knowledge can make you feel as if you are superior to other people. Definitely the scholar represented that because in a prideful way, and he told everyone that what he was about to do was a child's play, you know, nothing for me to do. It's well within my capabilities. So that's how book knowledge can distort your perception. It can expand your ego without you being aware of it. The more you pursue it, the more you feel you know more than other people, and therefore you must be higher than they are. And that's closely related to what I said as the first point, a disconnect from reality. So in this particular chapter, we will explore this at length. The overall point is that most people, you know, would put a lot of faith in books, but a Tao cultivator would be focusing instead on knowledge that's proven by actual application in real life. So that's the point I want to make as well. Let's continue on with the Tao Te Ching. Now we are in the first of the two lines where it says respectful response and scornful response. How much is the difference? Let's dig into that. Let's dive right in. So first, let's focus on respect and scorn. So Lao Tzu has observed the people around him, and he saw interactions among people, the expressions of respect and disrespect. So remember that he worked in the courts of the king as a royal librarian. So he constantly had opportunity to observe the interactions of the people in that court. people at different levels of power with different agendas that they're pursuing, with different schemes and plots, etc. And therefore, various expressions of respect and disrespect being exchanged among people all the time. And then what he noted was that, people really have a lot of attachments associated with opinions, approvals, and disapprovals. He could see how much these mattered to everyone that he was observing. So if you think about our modern world, it's pretty much the same. Just as it was around Lao Tzu in ancient times, I bet it's the same around you too. That almost everyone is worried about what others think. Almost everyone is concerned about reputation, image, and perception. Like, what is the image that I'm projecting? What must people think about me? This is one of the most dominant thought patterns among people in ancient times as well as today. Now, this is the conventional way to live. Now, Lao Tzu, cultivating the Tao, rises above, elevates beyond the conventional. So, Lao Tzu, on the other hand, did not stress over positive or negative opinions from anyone because he paid more attention to his own internal validation rather than external peer approval. So this is just like when we say, don't worry too much about what people think. You certainly want to take their expressions, their opinions into account, but you don't want to be fixated on them or be attached to them so that you become ecstatic when they think well of you and depressed when they do not think well of you. That is tying way too much of your emotional well-being to external opinions, validation, approval. So that's point number one. Now, if you look at that and then reflect back on respectful response and scornful response, how much is the difference? You begin to see exactly where Lao Tzu is coming from. He's saying, what's the difference, right? Someone who is respectful to you today may be scornful the next day. It can happen. So if you attach too much importance to that, that is actually a recipe for misery. You make yourself miserable by being too attached to it. All right, so I think that point is clear. Let's move on. Next, we have goodness and evil. How much do they differ? So once you understood the earlier point about respect and scorn, respect and disrespect, if you will, now you can see that the same idea holds for good and evil, which is Lao Tzu is basically saying, listen, people are really attached to their conceptions of good and evil. They have these fixed ideas. So whereas to me, to Lao Tzu himself, I see that they are relative and dependent on external circumstance. So what he's trying to say is this. People tend to have fixed ideas about who's good, who's bad, who's right, who's wrong. So at this point, I want to bring in some examples to illustrate from modern times. This is the part where I would like to actually ask you to pay close attention so you can follow the thought process, the logic. Okay, everybody ready? Let's go. Let's think about modern times. Let's think about our society. So who's good, who's bad, who's right, who's wrong. This is certainly true in our society. We know very well who the bad guys are. Who are they? Well, fanatical extremists with superstitious religious beliefs who terrorize us, constantly disrupting the peaceful lives of innocent civilians. So I think you know what I'm talking about, right? Scary stuff. This is real. This is reality out there. Okay, those are the bad guys. We know who the bad guys are. So who are the good guys? Well, we also know who the good guys are. Who are they? Well, the men and women who serve in our armed forces, battling the forces of terror and keeping us safe. All right. So I think that I haven't said anything controversial. I think that I have expressed the conventional notion. Has anyone noticed the dirty trick I just played on everybody? I'm going to pause for a moment. See if anyone can anticipate what I'm up to. So when I talk about the good guys, the men and women who serve in our armed forces, battling the forces of terror and keeping us safe, the assumption is that I am speaking from the perspective of someone today living here in North America, the conventional notion attached to that, conventional notion associated with that. But what if that's not really what I'm talking about? What if I am not speaking of a citizen of the United States, but I am speaking as a citizen of the Galactic Empire? We know who the good guys are, the men and women who served in our armed forces, battling the forces of terror and keeping us safe. Okay, those are the good guys. And what about the bad guys? You know, the fanatical extremists with superstitious religious beliefs who terrorize us, constantly disrupting the peaceful lives of innocent civilians. Those guys? Or those guys? And those superstitious religious beliefs. So the point that I'm making is similar to the point that Lao Tzu is making. Goodness and evil, how much do they differ? Well, if you think about it, this is unique for Lao Tzu among all the ancient philosophers. He realized that the concepts of good and evil were often determined by perspective and influenced by propaganda. Now, on both sides, you can be certain that there are living, breathing people. On both sides, you can be certain that they are real life human beings with family and friends. That's pretty much the only thing you can be certain of. So, as we enjoy the latest Star Wars epic, how many people actually will try to map it to our world, but from a different perspective? Probably not many. Although I can definitely guarantee that there are people in the Middle East that watch the Star Wars movies very differently and see themselves very differently than we do. So, am I saying that we should agree with them? No, I am not saying that at all. I am saying we need to develop the mental agility, the mental strength, indeed, to jump among the different perspectives to understand each one as much as humanly possible. So practitioners of the Tao train themselves to sample and understand different perspectives, up to and including the ones other than what they have grown up in or are most familiar with. With the following caveat for everyone, with the following note for everyone. Understanding different beliefs, different perspectives, is not necessarily equal to adopting them as your own. I find that this is a very common mistake. People thinking that just because you entertain ideas, beliefs from a different perspective, that means you've become, quote unquote, one of them. No, you are still you. You are still thinking with your own thoughts, except that you are now thinking better than most people who can only sample one perspective, their own, and understand one. That's it. Unless something traumatic happens to them, something drastically life-changing happens to them, they are not likely to change in how they feel. So, question, what is the Tao of being patriotic? Well, the Tao of being a patriot is about love. Love for one's country, love for one's people, love that does not exclude others, love that does not imply hatred for those who are not part of the collective where you are directing your love. So in the Tao, it's all about beginning with yourself and then to your family and then to the community and then to the country. Now, beyond the country, the world. So being a patriot in the Tao is not a contradiction, but a narrow definition of being a patriot to one country and one country only and being opposed to all other countries of the world would definitely not be part of the Tao. The Tao is not just to love one's country, but also love one's world. After all, it's the only world we have. We don't have any other world. We don't have a backup world. We don't have a plan B world. This is it. We're all on it. We have to take excellent care of it. All right, let's continue on. So as you can see, we're only a little ways into 20, and already we're seeing some ideas that are different, that are not conventional. This is not the kind of talk that you will hear typically on a Sunday, in church. This is not about, oh, we should be good, we should help people. This is about, listen, we can see the world in different ways. We can expand our minds. We can understand more and therefore do more. Okay, this continues on. So let's take a look at 6 and 7. What the people fear, I cannot be unafraid. so desolate, how limitless it is. These two lines require additional explanation. Let's start with line 6. What do people fear? I cannot be unafraid. What's Lao Tzu talking about? Lao Tzu is making 2 points here. First, he wants to make it clear that he's not setting himself apart from humanity. He's not immune to all the things that people regard as dangerous or harmful. He's only human, just like everyone else. So that's why, what do people fear? I cannot be unafraid. In other words, what do people fear? I should also fear. Physical dangers that people fear, I should fear those as well. I am not some kind of being apart from humanity, not some kind of superhero. Not bulletproof. So that's the point. Then, I think line 7 is even more difficult to understand for the typical person who approaches the Tao Te Ching. They're going to say, desolate, limitless, what? What is that about? Well, it's actually a point that's related to the first point. Let's explore the second point. Lao Tzu is acknowledging that other than issues like the physical aspects of life, he sees things quite differently from most. Sometimes the difference is so huge, so vast. It's like a desolate, limitless desert. So together, they say that basically Lao Tzu is saying, well, I'm just a human being like everyone else. Okay? So physically, I also need to survive. I need to have normal physical functions. I need to feed myself to not die of starvation. I need to avoid dangerous animals, and so on. I have that in common with everybody. Now, other than the physical aspects, in regards to survival, in regards to continuing biological existence, other than that, well, listen, everybody, I see things quite differently. And sometimes the difference is really, really vast, really different. So when you put those two together, line 6 and line 7 make sense. It's just that he doesn't go into details, like he says nothing right before saying desolate and limitless. It's not clear to most people that he's talking, listen, the difference in mental aspects, the difference in the mind is so wide, that chasm is so huge. All right, let's move on. So what are those differences? Let me point them out. So here we are looking once again at the analysis that we did in the beginning. So we're at the bottom of line 7 here, and then now you can see everything else below that is essentially a description of the differences, the vast differences. So now the position of line 7 makes sense. First, he's saying that, well, there are huge differences, almost limitless, right? And then he's pointing out what those differences are. There's we've got the people are excited, and then I alone am quiet and uninvolved. The people all have surplus, I alone seem lacking. People are bright, I alone am muddled. And here, by the way, when he points out ordinary people are bright, let me sort of explain what he's talking about. When he says bright, he's talking about how calculating people are. Most people are out for themselves, watching out for number one, watching out for their benefits. In that regard, they can be very calculating. So they're bright in terms of watching out for their self-interest. So they're calculating, they're competing, they're grabbing, the quickly grabbing resources, chasing after resources, getting them before other people do. So they are quote unquote bright in that sense. But Lao Tzu says, well, I alone am muddled. Like, I am not that interested in competing, aggressively after limited resources. I would rather draw from the limitless Tao, the infinite abundance that is available in the Tao. Then he goes to scrutinizing. People are very careful in what they get into. They scrutinize everything. Whereas Lao Tzu seems like the opposite. He seems like he's not that interested in extracting value out of the last cent in the money that he spends. And then down below, people all have goals. I alone am stubborn and lowly. That's not to say he doesn't have goals. That's not to say that he has no idea where he's going, but he certainly does not have the materialistic goals that people have. Goals like projecting the right image, improving one's reputation, ascending the social and corporate ladder. He's resisting that. He's like, I'm not interested. And then lastly, he says, I alone am different from them and value the nourishing mother. So when we look at all of this, and you can tell we still have a lot more analyses that we have to do. We have to go through all of these sections, these lines carefully. But already I am seeing some excellent insights that combine everything together, that wrap everything together so that the whole chapter is a cohesive whole. So for instance, from Maria, referencing knowledge at the beginning and then looking ahead to people being bright and scrutinizing and people being excited, enjoying a great feast, climbing up to the terrace in spring, etc. Maria says, the people are deceived by knowledge or derive knowledge from deceptive sources. They are excited as if at a feast, which makes them feel they have surplus, from which they believe to derive goals that makes them appear bright from scrutiny. But in reality, it's just manipulative nonsense. And this feeds on itself in vicious cycles. So for Lao Tzu, on the other hand, the spiritual lessons of Lao Tzu is more the opposite, uninvolved, lacking, muddled, obtuse, stubborn, and lowly. Well, when we talk about muddled, obtuse, stubborn, and lowly, Lao Tzu is specifically addressing how people would perceive such a person. Someone who opts out of competition, someone who decides to get out of the rat race and relax and enjoy life instead. That person seems rather lacking and stubborn and lowly because they're not climbing the ladder. They don't have a high position. They seem muddled and obtuse. So this whole idea is an insidious trap. And as Maria has observed, this whole concept of using knowledge to appear superior, this can be very tempting, very seductive. It can attract the gullible, even the very smart people into the deception. Now, it's necessary for us to study the Tao. Why? Well, because we have to know about this. We have to know about reality because we live in this world. We're part of this world. So we're going to encounter this all the time. All right, so let's be more specific. We still have a little bit of time to go over some of these differences, so I fully intend to do that. I'm gonna start at the top. As you can see here, I've got most people and Lao Tzu. And then I have the 3 lines beginning from line 8. So line 8, we have repeating characters, as you can see here. Whenever characters are repeated in Mandarin, in this case, xi xi, sounds funny, but that's how it is in Mandarin. This is an ancient expression that is no longer used in modern Mandarin. But what it means is excited. 2 characters repeating means very excited. So if you look below, xi xi refers to being excitable, restless, noisy, like, ooh, I can't wait to do this, I can't wait to see this. That's the picture being painted here. Then, as if enjoying a great feast. The 3 characters here can literally be translated character by character, enjoy great feast. The last 2 characters are also ancient expressions no longer used in modern Mandarin. So if you want to translate this, you had better be more than just familiar with classical Chinese. You have to know it really well. So in this case, this grand feast, it's not just food. This is a reference to physical pleasures. So this feast, think of it as the feast of life. That is, in life, there are many physical pleasures that one can enjoy. So the people are excited because they're enjoying this great feast. They're saturating their senses with all kinds of physical and sensory enjoyments, all kinds of pleasures. So that's what it's talking about. Then we have line 10. Line 10 says, climbing up to the terrace and spring. Okay, and let me explain these 3 characters. First character, Tun, means spring. Second character, Deng, means to ascend or to climb. Last character there, Tai, means platform or terrace. So spring, climb, terrace. Well, that's climbing up to the terrace in spring. Just like the feast is not about food, not limited to food, not just a reference to eating, this whole idea of climbing up to the terrace in spring is not just about travel, not just about a tourist attraction, not just about some kind of road trip. It's sightseeing, yes, but it represents all social activities, thrills that one can have. Okay, so to summarize, the people are excited. Why? Because they really get into the physical pleasures of the world, and they really get into all the social activities and thrills in the world. Together, you can imagine that this is a depiction from Lao Tzu about party hardy, about life is a party, we're all having a good time. Are you having a good time? And that's the idea. Now, the reality of the party, I think you know this, everyone has experience with this. The reality is that at a party with the music blaring, with people moving around, talking, conversing, and of course you attempt to converse as well, but the conversation turns into something like, hey, are you having a good time? What? I said, are you having a good time? What? Oh, yeah. How about yourself? Are you having a good time? What? Okay, that's usually the conversation in a party with very loud music and thumping bass that vibrates your innards. That's the reality of a party. And Lao Tzu says, hey guys, thanks, but no thanks. Lao Tzu says, well, actually, parties are fun, but I prefer quietness instead of parties. So that makes Lao Tzu different from other people. Most people are like, where's the party? Where's the party? Where the party at? We're going there. Lao Tzu says, well, I would prefer something more quiet than this very noisy activity. And he would prefer simple pleasures instead of sensory feasts. So the grand feast that people are all digging into and enjoy, representing physical pleasures, Lao Tzu says, well, I really delight in simple things in life. Those are the things that are more meaningful. Those are the things that are more lasting. So that's more my jam, and not a trip to the buffet, so to speak. I'm speaking, of course, metaphorically. Not overindulgence, not eating so much that I feel so full, like I'm about to burst, and then I have to sleep it off because I'm so tired. Oh, that food. So I'm positive, just like parties, that you've also had experience with this. We even have a popular term to describe that state, the food coma. You know what I'm talking about. So Lao Tzu says, thanks but no thanks to the food coma. Lao Tzu says, give me the simple pleasures in life. And then lastly, Lao Tzu says, well, okay, I really prefer quality instead of quantity. So when we talk about social activities, it is more the way that people tend to want, like, being associated with a lot of friends. Like, the more friends you have, the more popular you must be, and therefore that's a good thing. So Lao Tzu will be the person to say, rather than many acquaintances that I hardly know, I prefer quality. Just a few really good friends would be fine. I would prefer that over having many, many acquaintances that I get to know only superficially. I would prefer to hang out with a few quality individuals and really get to know them. Okay, so that's another difference between Lao Tzu and most people. So let's summarize all that, really drive home the point from lines 11, 12, and 13. Lao Tzu describes himself. First, he's saying, I alone am quiet and uninvolved. Why? Well, because quietness is much more conducive than noise for contemplation, reflection, and strengthening one's connection with the Tao. So, as a practical matter, living this life in the material world, every one of us has to seek a particular balance. A balance between activity and inactivity, between noise and quietness. So there's got to be activities happening in your life, but there's also got to be downtime, rest, quiet solitude. Those are the times when you can engage with yourself to reflect upon your current state of being. How cool is that? So that is what Lao Tzu prefers. And I wonder about you. What do you prefer? Next, line 12, like an infant, not yet smiling. What is that? Well, that requires more of an explanation as well. Notice that line 11 is a counter to line 8. So line 12 is a counter to line 9. So rather than physical pleasures, sensual pleasures, what Lao Tzu is saying is that, well, I'm more like an infant with basic needs, simple needs. I don't need this all-you-can-eat buffet, metaphorically speaking. I need nutritional intake of sustenance. Again, metaphorically speaking. So a newborn has the basic needs without all the things that come into play when the newborn grows into childhood, becomes a teenager and then an adult. So the simplest, most elementary point for a human being is infancy. And then 13, so weary, like having no place to return. So this is also something that requires a little bit of explanation. So think of it as a counter to line 10. Line 10, climbing up to the terrace in spring, representative of all kinds of thrills and social activities. So Lao Tzu is weary of all the socializing and partying everyone else is into. He has no interest in the games people play. Okay, I am definitely seeing just from everyone's feedback that this chapter is inspiring a lot of thoughts. It's definitely provoking a lot of thoughts and ideas and concepts and self-examination. That's fantastic. That's exactly what we want to do. So what we have to get into next, we have to, of course, continue this process. Beyond line 13 is line 14. However, looking at the time right now, we have to jump ahead. So this look at this slide, starting with 14, is just a preview. We're now at 12:25, time to jump to our summary for today. And I'm pretty happy to see that we actually covered enough that the summary will make sense. So let me cover the summary with you. There's a bunch of questions that I would like to ask everyone to contemplate. Question 1, how much importance do you place on the good opinion of others? Here, I would invite you to be brutally honest because, we live in this world, we have to interact with other people. I think I'd be lying if I say that, no, I am completely oblivious or unaware or don't care about the good opinions of other people. I think I do care somewhat, but I try not to get attached to it. I'm curious about you. How much importance do you place on it? And the follow-up question is, how much importance will be appropriate? And I'm pretty serious. I'm asking this question for real. I would love it if you guys can respond and tell me about what you think about yourself. I think it's a great exercise. Okay, second question. Can you envision the possibility of a radical shift in your perspective of good and evil? Well, that's the basis of the dirty trick that I played on you today, to radically shift what you think of as the good guys, the bad guys, etc. Or at least to demonstrate the possibility that it can be done. Then the follow-up question on that is, can you understand without becoming the other side? To understand the other side doesn't mean you have to move over to the other side and become one with them. So again, a question and a challenge to you. And the last one, I think, is would be even more of a challenge if if you decide not to do the other two questions, I hope you decide to do this one. And that is, in your own words, what are the characteristics of Lao Tzu's self-description? You have heard Lao Tzu describe himself, uninvolved, obtuse, or at least perceived by other people as obtuse, stubborn, etc. So not into parties, into quietness, stuff like that. So what are the characteristics? So when you are clear on his description of himself, I want to ask, which of these characteristics do you share? How are you similar to Lao Tzu, or dissimilar, as the case may be? And of the ones where you are not the same as Lao Tzu, follow-up question on that would be, well, which one of those characteristics would you like to cultivate for yourself? So again, I think this is a very provocative, this is a, to me, inspiring chapter, something that requires, I think, quite a bit of work on us to think about where we are, how we think. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.